This desire to categorize living things is almost as ancient as science itself. Aristotle was perhaps the first to codify a system for classifying animals by their internal and external similarities. During the mid-1700s, the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus developed a standard method for naming organisms. He introduced the idea of genus and species. To him, animal organisms were perfect and unchangeable creations. 100 years later, Charles Darwin shook the world. His theory said that species could actually change over time. What's more, it also implied that all animals may have descended from a single common ancestor. Darwin suspected, if only we could travel millions and millions of years back in time, that we could witness the birth of the Earth's first animal. In the beginning, the Earth was devoid of living things. Then, about 3.5 billion years ago, something completely new appeared: life. For 2.5 billion years, single-celled organisms dominated the Earth. They were minuscule creatures, completely enclosed in a fragile membrane. These were living, pulsing beings, but they were not animals. Somehow, cells developed a language that allowed them to work together. When they did, it was a turning point for life on Earth. The very first animal had begun to take shape. But what was this first creature?
The first animal would really have been something very simple. It would not have had a head, a brain, a mouth, or any internal organs, not even bones. It would have been something made up of a bunch of cells, a bunch of animal cells. Those cells would have to cooperate, to work together for the common good of the animal. So what would such a creature have looked like? And even more importantly, is there anything like it still living today?
Incredibly, such an animal still exists, and it thrives in these waters. And that is why Diaz has come to Indonesia.
Okay, here we are. Here you have the city of Nadu, and to the north you have Nadu Tua and Bunat.
Local legend Hans Batuna is a retired medical doctor, affectionately known as the grandfather of diving in northern Sulawesi.
There are caves in any
And there are caves there, especially in Nadu Tua.
Batuna knows exactly where Diaz can find what she has come to study and points the area out to her.
Spot around there. And there's a very deep trough here, and here the Mariana Trough.
He tells her that she must go to the foot of a volcano called Manado Tua.
Bigger.
There she will find a reef that ends in an underwater wall, plunging hundreds of feet into the depths. There, she will find what she seeks. Ever since Darwin put forth his theory of evolution, scientists like Diaz have puzzled over animal origins. At long last, she and others think they have found a creature that links us to a moment in deep time, to the first animals of Earth. It is a creature that is somewhat alien in its appearance, a being without a nervous system, muscles, limbs, or a brain. Its body is defined by a loose assemblage of cells. It is the ancient sponge.
When I encounter a sponge, it just takes my breath away. I just want to stop and look. You know, they're just so alien, so old. I mean, so ancient and so different to anything else you find in the bottom of the sea. When I encounter a sponge, I'm just in awe, not only by their presence, but their giant size and their beauty, but they are so different. You know, they're just so different, and you just cannot stop yourself asking questions to this animal. What are you? How did you grow to this size? How do you manage to through every day? What do you do? You know, how do you eat? It's just they're so alien forms of life, you know, and at the same time they're so present that it's just it just leaves me in awe. Yeah, I think they're beautiful, they're original, they are mysterious. They have lots of secrets that we have to unveil, you see, and that for me it's an attractive thing. They keep a lot of secrets that I think are very important.
Sponges don't give up their secrets easily. Their apparent simplicity is both provocative and perplexing. At a distance, they seem solid. But a closer look reveals a labyrinth of tiny holes, tunnels, and chambers. Unlike our bodies, sponges have no definitive shape. They are as varied as their many habitats. Scientists have described more than 9,000 different species of sponge. They thrive in salt and freshwater environments around the world, turning up in the most bizarre and unexpected places, from the frigid waters of the poles to the warm seas of the tropics. Diaz recognizes the sponge as a vibrant animal, but for centuries, scientists have debated whether in fact this was true. Even today, it stretches the imagination to think of this odd organism as an animal. To the untrained eye, it barely seems alive at all. When we think of animals, we conjure up something entirely different. Animals move. They feed themselves. They reproduce and care for their young. They engage in fierce territorial battles. In comparison, a sponge seems lifeless. If it is an animal, it certainly conceals its true nature.
Hi.
To help her unravel the mysteries of the sponge, Diaz has teamed up with biologist and conservationist Mark Erdman.
Hi there, Christina.
Hi.
Welcome to Bunaken.
Thank you.
How's your diving been so far?
It's been great.
Good.
It's mostly shallow. Waiting for you to go deep.
Okay, I think we can handle that.
I can't wait.
Erdman has spent years as a marine researcher in Indonesia. He knows these waters and the reefs they harbor. Today, Diaz has her sights on a reef wall that drops hundreds of feet into the deep. Together, she and Erdman will descend the cliff face, searching for sponges that live only here.
There's quite a few very interesting sponges down where the coelacanths live, down in the cave. Yeah.
So many undescribed species in this area.
The samples they collect will provide a window into a fascinating world, the microscopic realm, where sponges are most active and dynamic. Sponge cells are unique in the animal kingdom. But in order to study their miraculous abilities, Diaz and Erdman will have to gather living samples and transport them to the lab.
We need sponges to study in the lab, and so we have to collect specimens. But we need to just cut a small section to be examined, and because it doesn't have a nervous system, we are not really hurting it. In time, the cut area will grow again as if nothing had happened to it.
All animals rely on cell-to-cell communication. But Diaz and others have been able to show that sponge cells have a unique way of working together. To witness these abilities is to be amazed.
Cell-to-cell communication is very important for all organisms. But in sponges, it's uniquely important because in sponges, cells carry out all the functions that other organisms are taken care of by specific organs, like the heart, or the nervous system, or the skeletal system, or the blood. So sponges have many responsibilities to perform.
Unlike most of our cells, those of sponges retain a special freedom. They can continuously reinvent themselves, performing some truly miraculous feats. If a sponge is passed through a sieve, its cells are separated. But somehow the cells still recognize each other. Over several hours, they begin to come together, building many new sponges. No other plant or animal can resurrect itself this way. While the sponge appears strikingly different from other animals, it does share some basic hallmarks of animal life. Its cells are held together, in part, by a protein called collagen, which is possessed by all animals on Earth.
Collagen, which is the most abundant protein in the animal world, forms the supportive system for the sponge body. So either in the form of small fibers that all sponges have that give support to the cells, or in the form of strong and stout fibers that give rigidity and support that the sponge needs to achieve larger sizes. Most people, when they think of a sponge, they think on their bath sponge. And when you have a bath sponge in your hand, what you're holding is a soft skeleton that is made of collagen.
But unlike the bath variety, many sponges aren't soft at all. In addition to the soft collagen of the bath sponge, many have millions of brittle crystalline spicules embedded in their bodies. Spicules are microscopic structures that help give a sponge its rigidity and form.
Spicules are an incredible tool for us today to identify most of the sponges that are living in the oceans. You can identify a species or a group of sponges not only by the type and the size of the spicules they have, but the way that they are arranged in the sponge body.
For most sponges, the glassy spicules act as a kind of fingerprint. Magnified, their dazzling array of shapes and sizes are as beautiful as they are unearthly. If the sponge is indeed an animal, it must eat to survive. How does it feed itself when it has no obvious mouth?
A sponge is actually a fantastic pump, which requires an incredible coordination of cells to function. It's a living filtering machine. It lives by sucking in water and filtering out food particles.
These seemingly motionless creatures are working extremely hard in order to feed.
Imagine that to get an ounce of food, a sponge has to pump over a ton of water through itself. Now, can you imagine doing that yourself? Drinking a ton of water to get an ounce of food to your body?
Diaz has studied sponges for decades, yet she has never seen them feed in the wild. Until now, few have. To make the invisible visible, Diaz injects a harmless colored dye into the water near the body of a sponge.
One of the ways we can test for the rate of water flow that moves through the sponge body is to inject a colored dye and measure the speed at which it is pumped through the sponge. Actually, for me, this is the first time I've done this, and I've been really looking forward to the opportunity for years. And I'm so excited to try this experiment. When I start seeing the color dye coming out of the sponge in less than 2 seconds from when it was applied, I could not believe my eyes. This steady and strong continuous flow of water continuously coming out of the sponge was an incredible realization of the dynamic existence of this organism. It's an incredible sight to witness.
These ghostly exhalations are proof that the sponge is actively pumping. With no mouth, it sucks water directly through its sponge-like body walls, which are shot through with millions of narrow canals and tiny chambers. How does it do it? What secrets hide within the belly of this beast? The best way to find out is to enter one of the many portals into the sponge's secret inner world. Drifting along with countless single-celled organisms, we feel the tug of a current. In the wonderland within, this sponge's cells all work for the common good, but they do it in wildly different ways. As the current draws us on, we pass sponge cells that are making new spicules. The walls themselves are treacherous. They can simply engulf their unfortunate prey. through ever narrower passages, the current slows until we burst into one of the sponge's millions of tiny beating hearts. These are choanocytes, cells whose whip-like flagellae powers the pump. The flow quickens again as it whisks us away through the labyrinth of canals that lead out into the sponge's central cavity. What once seemed barely alive is actually a living animal, more complex than we could have imagined. The sponge's pumping does more than satisfy its hunger for food. In fact, its sex life depends on pumping as well. 500 million years ago, these were the very first animals to reproduce sexually, the first to combine sperm and egg to create offspring. Set adrift, some sperm will be lucky enough to enter another sponge of the same species. If the sperm are truly fortunate, they will fertilize the eggs within. Our intimate tour of the sponge reveals a creature full of surprises. From feeding to reproduction, it engages in elaborate behavior. More than a mere aggregation of cells, the sponge is in fact a living, thriving animal.